If Marcus Reed had taken the usual exit that night, the police would have found me before sunrise. Not alive. They would have found my front door open, the kitchen light on, and a cup of tea cooling beside the sink. They might have called it a burglary at first. Then they would have discovered that nothing valuable was missing, no jewelry, no cash, not even the old silver watch my husband had left in the bedroom drawer. What would have been missing was a folder. A thin gray folder containing 6 names, 11 case numbers, and a pattern no one at my office wanted to see. At 12:17 on a rain-soaked Tuesday in Seattle, my driver passed the exit to my neighborhood without slowing down. "Marcus," I said, leaning forward from the back seat. "You missed Lakeview." He did not answer. The windshield wipers cut back and forth with the steady rhythm of a metronome. His hands were locked around the steering wheel. 10 and 2. Too tight. "Marcus?" He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Eleanor," he said. "There's a man inside your house." That was the moment my old life ended. But to understand why a stranger was waiting in my darkened home, you have to understand what I had found 3 weeks earlier and why the only person who believed I was in danger was a night driver who had once ignored a warning of his own. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I was 63 years old when this happened. And until that winter I believed danger announced itself. I thought it came with broken windows, raised voices, footsteps behind you in an alley. I did not know it could arrive as a corrected invoice. I had lived in Seattle for almost 40 years, most of them with my husband, Thomas. He taught government and American history at a public high school in Queen Anne. I worked as a legal records specialist first for private law firms, later for a civil litigation archive that stored sealed depositions, settlement agreements, medical exhibits, and original evidence from cases too old or too inconvenient for anyone to remember. Thomas used to call my job the place where paper goes to wait for justice. He died the previous spring. A clot, the doctors said. Sudden. Unpredictable. One moment he was complaining that the coffee tasted burned. The next he was on our kitchen floor, one hand pressed against his chest, looking at me with an apology in his eyes as if leaving me were somehow his fault. After the funeral, the house changed its voice. Pipes groaned louder. Floorboards creaked in rooms I was not using. The refrigerator clicked on in the middle of the night and made me sit upright in bed. Grief does not simply make a home quiet. It makes every small sound feel like someone failing to return. Our daughter, Claire, lived in Denver with her husband and 2 children. She called every Sunday, sometimes every Wednesday. But grief had made me impatient with sympathy. She would ask if I had eaten. I would hear the fear behind the question and lie. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm fine." Fine became the answer that allowed everyone to keep moving. I was not ready to retire. Financially, I could not. Emotionally, I did not want to. Work gave the hours edges. It told me where to be and what to touch and which problems could still be solved. Northwest Civil Records Repository occupied 3 underground floors beneath an office building near Pioneer Square. It was not glamorous. There were no windows, only fluorescent lights, concrete walls, locked cages, rolling shelves, and the dry smell of paper that had outlived the people who signed it. My shift ended at 11:45 p.m. For years I had taken a bus home. But the late route was cut 2 months after Thomas died. My daughter insisted I use a rideshare app. "I don't like getting into cars with strangers," I told her. "You worked in litigation for 35 years, she said. "You've spent your life in rooms with strangers." She had a point, which irritated me. That was how I met Marcus Reed. His car was a dark blue sedan with a cracked phone mount and a pine-scented air freshener that had long since stopped smelling like pine. He was 54, broad-shouldered, quiet, with a trace of gray in his beard and the watchful eyes of someone who noticed exits before entering a room. His rating was nearly perfect. The first night he drove me home, he asked only one question. "Long shift?" "Long life," I said. He smiled once, barely, and after that we rode mostly in silence. Over the next month, Marcus seemed to be the driver who accepted my request most often. Same pickup point. Same time. Same 12-minute route north. He never asked why I worked nights. I never asked why he did. The arrangement became familiar enough that I began bringing 2 cups of tea from the break room, one for me, one for him. Chamomile at first. Then ginger. Then black tea with too much honey because he once mentioned that his throat hurt in cold weather. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said one night. "I know. Then why do you?" "Because it's cold." He accepted the cup. That was all. but routines are dangerous things. They feel like safety because they repeat. In reality, repetition simply makes us easier to study. The first sign came on a Thursday. Marcus slowed as we approached my street. A silver station wagon was parked across from my house. Nothing unusual about that. Seattle neighborhoods are full of cars that look permanently abandoned. Marcus looked at it twice. "You know that vehicle?" he asked. "No. I saw it here Monday." "So did half the neighborhood, probably." He did not laugh. The station wagon was gone the next morning. It returned 3 nights later. The correction appeared on a Monday morning, buried among 43 routine notices that had arrived through the archive's document management system. Most of those notices meant nothing more dramatic than a misspelled name, an invoice uploaded twice, or a page scanned upside down. I was supposed to glance at each request, confirm that the metadata matched, and route it to the proper retention folder. The request involving Martha Keene looked ordinary until I opened the original settlement file. Her case had been filed 7 years earlier against a property company that owned 3 low-income apartment buildings south of downtown. The complaint said the company had ignored a leaking furnace, mold behind the bedroom wall, and exposed wiring in a hallway where children played. Martha had developed respiratory problems. Her grandson had been shocked badly enough to spend 2 nights in the hospital. The case settled before trial. The public docket listed a payment of $84,000. The archive's internal disbursement sheet showed that Martha's attorneys had deducted fees and medical liens, leaving her with $48,612. The scanned receipt, however, showed $48,325, $287. A small discrepancy. The kind that teaches reasonable people to look away. I checked the mathematical total twice. Then I opened the image properties. The receipt had supposedly been scanned on March 8, 7 years earlier. The scanner identifier belonged to a machine our company had not purchased until 4 years after that date. I sat very still. There are moments when the mind recognizes danger before emotion catches up. Nothing in the office changed. Phones rang. A printer coughed out labels. Someone in intake laughed at something on her screen. Yet the room seemed to tilt, just slightly, as if I had discovered that the floor beneath my chair was not attached to the building. I pulled the physical box from restricted storage. The original receipt was missing. In its place was a photocopy with a blue certification stamp and the initials S.G. Sylvia Grant. Sylvia was the archive's operations director. She had hired me 9 years earlier, remembered everyone's birthday, and kept emergency chocolate in the second drawer of her desk. When Thomas died, she had attended the funeral and brought a casserole I never ate. Seeing her initials did not make me suspicious. At first it made me relieved. Surely there would be an explanation. I carried the box to her office. Her door was open. She was speaking to a vendor on the phone, her voice warm and efficient. She smiled when she saw me and raised one finger. While I waited, I noticed a silver photograph frame beside her monitor. Sylvia stood on a sailboat with a man I did not recognize, both of them wearing white jackets against a bright blue sky. The man had one hand on the wheel and the other around her waist. When she ended the call, she said, "Please tell me you have good news. Everyone brings me problems before lunch." I showed her the numbers. For half a second, something moved across her face. Not fear exactly. Calculation. Then she laughed. "Eleanor, you nearly gave me a heart attack over $200. $287. That precision is why we love you." She leaned back. "Old settlement files are messy. The lawyers send revised lien statements after the fact. Someone probably uploaded the wrong version. The scanner did not exist when this was supposedly scanned." Her smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. "Then the document was rescanned during migration. The metadata says it was original intake. Metadata can be wrong. The original is gone." She folded her hands on the desk. "What are you asking me?" I had not realized how carefully I had been choosing my words until then. "I am asking whether there is a supplemental chain of custody record." "There should be." "There isn't." Sylvia's gaze shifted to the box, then back to me. "Leave it here. I'll ask technology to trace the migration history." I did not move. "Eleanor." Her tone softened. "You've had a difficult year. I know work has been your way of keeping the walls from closing in. But sometimes a clerical error is simply a clerical error." The reference to Thomas was gentle. That made it worse. I took the box back to my desk. By noon, my access to the Keen file had been removed. The system message said the record was under legal hold. At 12:14, Sylvia sent me an email thanking me for my diligence and instructing me not to discuss the discrepancy with coworkers. At 12:19, I printed the email. That was the first copy I made. It was not the last. Over the next 4 days, I searched without appearing to search. I used ordinary retention reports and cross-referenced old scanner identifiers. I compared image compression patterns, certification stamps, and payment totals. Each discrepancy was small. $93, $411, $1,006. The victims were elderly tenants, injured laborers, immigrant families, and people whose cases had settled under confidentiality agreements. Their files shared no attorney, no defendant, and no judge, but they shared Sylvia's initials. And one outside records vendor. Price Legal Recovery. By Friday evening I had 6 names. I wrote them by hand because I no longer trusted the office network. Then I copied the case numbers beneath them and slipped the paper into the lining of my handbag. As I shut down my computer, Sylvia appeared beside my cubicle. I had not heard her approach. "You work too late," she said. "So do you." She glanced at my empty screen. "Did you find anything else unusual?" The honest answer rose to my mouth. I swallowed it. "No," I said. "You were right. It was probably migration." For a moment she studied me with an expression I had seen in depositions when a witness decided whether a lie was good enough. Then she placed one hand on my shoulder. "Go home, Eleanor." Her fingers rested there a second too long. That night, when Marcus drove me from the archive, a silver station wagon followed us for 11 blocks. Marcus first noticed the passenger because the man did not behave like someone who had been drinking, though he smelled strongly of whiskey. It was the previous Saturday, shortly after 2 in the morning. Marcus had picked him up outside a hotel near Pioneer Square. The ride request listed a destination in Bellevue, but before they reached the freeway, the man asked to change the address. "Lakeview," he said. Marcus asked for a street number. The passenger gave mine. He sat directly behind the driver's seat, where Marcus could not see him without turning. Most passengers chose the opposite side. Marcus told me later that professional drivers notice those choices the way nurses notice breathing. Not because each detail means danger, but because ordinary behavior has a rhythm, and the wrong note carries. The man spent the first several minutes making phone calls that did not connect. Each time he reached voicemail, he hung up without speaking. Then he asked Marcus whether the Lakeview neighborhood had alleys behind the houses. Marcus said he did not know. The man asked whether residents usually parked in garages. Marcus said it depended on the house. Then he laughed and said, "Old people are creatures of habit." At a red light, Marcus looked in the mirror. The passenger's eyes were clear. His hands were steady. The whiskey had been poured onto his coat. Marcus deliberately missed the turn to my street. The passenger leaned forward. "You passed it." "Construction," Marcus said. "I'll circle." There was no construction. As Marcus drove the longer route, the passenger received a text. The screen lit his face. Marcus saw only the beginning of the message reflected in the side window. "She still has." The man covered the phone with his palm. When they reached my block, my house was dark. The passenger told Marcus to stop 2 houses away. He paid cash, refused a receipt, and walked toward the alley instead of the front sidewalk. Marcus remained parked until the man disappeared behind a cedar hedge. He considered calling the police. Then he remembered the last time he had called about something that felt wrong. 5 years earlier, his younger sister, Naomi, had been dating a man who controlled where she went, who she spoke to, and how she spent her money. Marcus had seen bruises. Naomi said she had fallen. He had heard the man threaten her through a closed apartment door. Naomi begged Marcus not to interfere. She said intervention would only make things worse. Marcus called anyway. The officers arrived, spoke to both of them, and left because Naomi denied being threatened. Her boyfriend learned who had called. For weeks afterward, Naomi blamed Marcus. Then she stopped answering his messages. 3 months later, she moved to another state with the man. Marcus had not heard from her since. The experience taught him the wrong lesson. That seeing danger did not give you the power to stop it, and that trying could cost you the person you meant to protect. So he sat in his car outside my block, watching rain bead on the windshield, arguing with himself. Finally, he drove away. The next afternoon, he accepted a ride request from the archive and recognized my name. He had driven me twice before, though neither of us remembered the other clearly. I came out carrying a grocery bag and a stack of folders pressed against my chest. During the ride, I apologized for the smell of peppermint tea leaking from a thermos. Marcus said it was better than most things people spilled in his car. I laughed. It was a small exchange, but it made me real to him. When we reached my house, he saw the same cedar hedge, the same alley, the same brass number beside the front door. He waited until I went inside. That night, he checked the driver app and found that the passenger's account had been deleted. 2 days later, the silver station wagon appeared behind him while I was in his car. At first he assumed coincidence. It stayed with us through 3 turns. When Marcus slowed, it slowed. When he changed lanes, it changed lanes. Then, a block before my street, it disappeared. He said nothing because he did not want to frighten me with a theory built from shadows. The next ride, he asked whether I lived alone. I told him my husband had died. He apologized and changed the subject. Afterward, he hated himself for the question. It sounded intrusive, exactly the sort of thing a woman should not have to answer to a male driver at night. Yet the answer made the pattern worse. He began checking the curb outside the archive before I emerged. Twice he saw the station wagon. Once he photographed the license plate, but rain blurred 2 characters. He searched the partial plate online and found nothing useful. Then came the Thursday when I found my back gate unlatched. I told Marcus it was probably the wind. He looked toward the alley and said, "Wind doesn't lift a latch." I remember becoming irritated. Not with him, but with the fact that his sentence made sense. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed. The windows were locked. The doors showed no damage. I walked through every room with the lights on, carrying the heavy flashlight Thomas had kept beside the bed. I opened closets. I checked behind shower curtains, feeling foolish and terrified at once. In the study, one drawer stood open by less than an inch. It contained Thomas's old lesson plans, tax records, and a collection of fountain pens. Nothing was missing, but the dust along the drawer's edge had been wiped away by a fingertip. I called Marcus from the kitchen. He answered before the first ring finished. "I think someone was here," I said. There was a pause. Then he told me about the passenger. He told me about the address, the alley, and the sentence reflected on the phone. When he finished, I sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's empty chair across from me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "Because I wasn't sure." "Are you sure now?" "No," he said. "But I am sure enough not to ignore it again." That distinction saved my life. Marcus did not tell me everything at once. That was one reason I trusted him. People who want to frighten you rush. They pile facts together until fear becomes the only possible reaction. Marcus offered information reluctantly, like a man handing over something heavy. The next Friday, he parked outside my house but did not unlock the doors. "Do you know anyone named Nolan Price?" he asked. The initials struck me first. "Ann B. I've seen the name in access records," I said. "Why?" Marcus stared through the windshield. "He's been in my car." "How many times?" 7. The heater hummed between us. "He works contract security." Marcus continued. "Different commercial properties. Mostly nights. Drinks after shift. Talks when he drinks." "What does he talk about?" "Money. People who don't know they've been robbed. Old files. A woman in records who keeps reopening closed cases." My hands went cold around the teacup. "Did he say my name?" "Not at first." "At first?" Marcus turned around. "Tuesday night, he gave your street." For a moment I heard nothing, not the heater, not the rain, not even my own breathing. "What exactly did he say?" Marcus unlocked his phone and opened a note. "She lives near Lakeview. Gray house, green trim. Alone since the husband died." The cup slipped against my palm. Tea spilled onto my coat. Marcus reached for a napkin. I did not take it. How would he know about Thomas? "I don't know. You could have misunderstood." I wrote it down before I picked up my next passenger. "Why?" His jaw tightened. "Because I once heard a warning and decided it wasn't my business." He looked away. "My son was 19. He called me after midnight. Said he was at a party and one of his friends had a gun. I told him to leave. He said he couldn't because his friend was threatening someone. I was working. I told him to call the police." Marcus paused. He did not. Neither did I. I thought he was exaggerating. "A girl was shot 40 minutes later. My son wasn't charged, but he never forgave me for not coming. We haven't spoken in 6 years. The story settled into the car. I'm sorry, I said. Suangi. He looked at me again. I don't ignore patterns anymore. That weekend, I called Claire and told her someone might have entered the yard. She wanted me on the next flight to Denver. No. Mom. This isn't stubbornness. This is dangerous. I have a job. You have a life. I'm aware. She went quiet, then said the thing I had spent months avoiding. Dad is gone. You don't have to prove you can survive everything alone. The words hurt because they were true. I promised to contact the police if anything else happened. I did not tell her about Nolan Price. On Monday, I searched the internal directory. Nolan Price was listed as a rotating overnight security contractor with temporary master access to the loading dock, basement corridors, fire stairs, and secure storage areas during alarm failures. His access should have been logged manually whenever the override was used. There were no manual logs. I printed his schedule. Then I made a mistake. I left the printout on my desk while I went to the restroom. When I returned, it had moved. Only slightly. Turned at an angle. On top of it sat a paper clip I had not placed there. I looked toward the camera above the aisle. The red indicator light was off. I called building security. A man answered. Security desk. Who is this? A pause. Price. Every muscle in my body locked. Miss Hayes, he said. He knew my name. I hung up. 10 seconds later, the phone rang. He let it ring. Across the archive, one fluorescent tube flickered, went dark, then came back. I packed my belongings and left before the end of my shift. Marcus arrived within 4 minutes. As I climbed into the car, I saw a man behind the glass doors of the building. Black rain jacket. Baseball cap. He raised one hand. Not a wave. More like a promise. Detective Lena Ortiz arrived at the archive the following morning without a uniform and without announcing herself. She was in her 40s, compact and unsmiling, with the patient eyes of someone who had learned that people reveal more while filling silence. We met in a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Marcus sat at a separate table where he could see the entrance. Ortiz noticed him immediately. Your driver? She asked. My witness. That is not what I asked. I looked at Marcus. He was pretending to read the news on his phone. He is both. Ortiz opened a notebook. Start with the money. I explained the altered receipts, scanner dates, missing originals, and certification stamps. She interrupted only to clarify details. When I finished, she asked how much money I believed had been stolen. I don't know. Thousands? Possibly hundreds of thousands. The amounts in the files are small, but those may only be test changes. Or fragments of larger transfers. Who benefits? I haven't found that yet. Who knows you are looking? Sylvia Grant. Anyone else? I hesitated. The previous evening, after speaking with Marcus, I had called an attorney named Calvin Brooks. Calvin had represented one of the 6 claimants. He remembered the case but said the accounting records were sealed. When I mentioned Price legal recovery, he became quiet. Then he said he would call me back from a secure line. He never did. Ortiz wrote down his name. Do not contact anyone else, she said. I need proof. You need to remain alive long enough to provide what you have. The bluntness angered me. The police officer yesterday said there was no evidence of a crime. The officer yesterday evaluated a possible break-in. I am evaluating a pattern involving financial fraud, evidence tampering, and a man conducting surveillance on your home. Those are different questions. She asked to see the gray folder. I had left it in a safe deposit box that morning. Ortiz approved of that. Then she asked whether anyone at work could know about the box. No. Did you use your phone to locate the bank? I had. Did you drive there directly from home? I had. Then assume they know. For the first time, fear became physical. It moved beneath my ribs like cold water. Ortiz arranged for a patrol car to pass my street periodically. She could not assign permanent protection without a direct threat or stronger evidence. She asked Marcus to send the photographs of the station wagon and requested data from the ride company about the deleted passenger account. Before leaving, she said, most people imagine investigations as a straight line. Find clue, identify suspect, make arrest. In reality, we spend most of our time proving that what looks connected is actually connected. The people you are dealing with will use that delay. What should I do? Change your routine. Do not go home alone. Do not tell anyone where you are staying. And whatever you believe is hidden at the archive, do not retrieve it without calling me. That last instruction mattered because I had already hidden something there. The physical chain of custody log for Martha Keene's file had been misfiled behind a box of deposition exhibits. It showed 3 after-hours access entries, all signed by Nolan Price, owner of Price Legal Recovery. Sylvia had countersigned each one. The log also listed a storage location I had never seen. Sublevel C. Cage 14. Our building had only 2 public basement levels. I waited until Ortiz left before telling Marcus. He stared at me. You are going back for it. I work there. That is not an answer. It is evidence. So tell the detective. If I tell her now, she may need a warrant. Sylvia will know the moment police contact the company. The log could disappear. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. And if you go alone, you could disappear. The sentence landed harder than he intended. He looked away. I thought of Thomas, who had spent 31 years teaching teenagers that civic courage meant acting before certainty arrived. He had believed in systems but never confused faith with passivity. Institutions are tools. He once told a classroom after a local corruption scandal. Tools do nothing unless someone is willing to pick them up. I called Ortiz. She listened, swore quietly, and told me not to move. By noon, she had obtained authorization to accompany me into the archive under the pretext of reviewing records for an unrelated case. Sylvia greeted us in the lobby with a smile so polished it looked painful. Detective, she said. We are always happy to support law enforcement. Her eyes moved to me. Eleanor, I thought you were taking a personal day. I changed my mind. I see that. Sublevel C was accessible through a freight elevator controlled by a key switch. Sylvia claimed she did not have the key. Facilities claimed the level had been decommissioned after flooding. Nolan Price's company, they said, had once rented storage there but had ended the contract years earlier. Ortiz asked for the access records. The system showed no elevator trips to Sublevel C in 18 months. The machine room counter showed 47. That was enough for Ortiz to request a search warrant. It was not enough to stop what happened that night. At 9:06 p.m., the archive's fire alarm activated. At 9:11, Sylvia called me at the hotel where I had checked in under another name. She said smoke had damaged several restricted boxes, including Martha Keene's. She said my help was urgently needed. She also knew the name of my hotel. The police took the first report politely. Polite is not the same as convinced. A patrol officer came to my house, inspected the gate, checked the windows, and wrote down the description of the silver station wagon. There were no signs of forced entry. No clear theft. No direct threat. Install a camera, he advised. I did. Marcus helped me choose one and refused to let me pay for installation. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, at 2:13 a.m., the camera recorded movement near the side gate. The image was grainy. A hooded figure stepped into frame, paused beneath the eave, then reached upward. The video ended. Someone had disconnected the camera. The next morning, I found the power cable sliced cleanly. This time, the police paid attention. A detective named Renee Alvarez called me that afternoon. She had a calm voice and a habit of asking the same question twice in different ways. Tell me about the files. I explained the discrepancies, the access initials, the missing original, and Nolan's security privileges. Do you have copies? No. Copies cannot leave the repository. Does Price know that? I don't know. Could he believe you took something? Yes. Could someone else benefit from these changes? Almost certainly. She asked me not to return to work until she had spoken with the company. My employer disagreed. Sylvia called less than an hour later. You contacted law enforcement without notifying legal? Someone cut the wire to my security camera. That is a residential matter. It may be connected to our records. You do not know that. I know Nolan Price used a master override and failed to log it. Silence. Then Sylvia said, "Come in tomorrow. We need to discuss your status." My status? Paid administrative leave. The phrase sounded reasonable. It was not. Administrative leave would remove me from the archive while giving someone time to clean every trace. I called Detective Alvarez. She did not tell me what to do. She only said, "Do not take records. Do not confront anyone. If you return, keep your phone on." I returned the next night. Not because I was brave. Because I was angry. Thomas used to say fear and anger were twins. One froze you, the other moved you. The trick was deciding which one got to drive. At 10:40 p.m., I entered cage C with a supervisor's key and reviewed the oldest file, in the pattern the Martha Keene settlement. The paper release listed a payment of $68,400. The digital scan listed $65,982. The difference had been divided into 3 transfers routed through a vendor called North Coast Processing. I searched the other cases. Same vendor, different account endings. I photographed the then I saw something I had missed. Every altered case had been transferred into our facility from the same outside law office. Price, Kessler, and Dean. Price. I searched the firm's archived personnel. Nolan Price had worked there 22 years earlier as an investigator. And there, among the scanned witness lists from an old civil fraud trial, I saw my husband's name. Thomas Hayes. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Thomas had testified against Nolan Price in a contractor fraud case involving public school renovation funds. Price had falsified safety inspections. A ceiling later collapsed in an elementary school gym. No children died, but 3 were injured. Thomas, then a young teacher and union representative, had discovered that warning reports were buried. He testified. Price lost his investigator's license and later served 14 months for evidence tampering. Thomas had never told me. A sound came from the corridor. Metal against metal. The cage door. Someone was testing the handle. I turned off the monitor. Through the wire mesh, I saw a shadow pass. Then Nolan Price's voice. "Working late, Mrs. Hayes?" I did not answer. He stepped into view. He was older than the photograph, heavier, with pale eyes and a smile that did not reach them. "You look like Thomas," he said. My heart struck hard against my ribs. "You knew my husband." I knew what kind of man he pretended to be. I reached for my phone. He saw the movement. "Careful," he said softly. "These buildings have terrible reception underground." The overhead lights went out. In the darkness, my phone vibrated. A message from Marcus. "I'm outside. Are you safe?" I typed one word. "No." The call was a trap, but it was designed around the one weakness Sylvia understood perfectly. I could not bear the thought of evidence being destroyed while I waited safely somewhere else. Ortiz did not answer her phone. Later I learned she was in court requesting the warrant. I left a message, then called Marcus. "Do not go," he said. "I am already in the lobby." He used a word I had never heard from him before, then told me to stay where I was. 11 minutes later, his car stopped beneath the hotel's awning. I got in carrying my handbag, a flashlight, and the foolish belief that knowing something was dangerous made me prepared for it. Marcus did not drive toward the archive. "Turn around," I said. "No. There may be a fire." The fire department would be there. Sylvia said it was contained. "Sylvia knows where you are staying." I stared at him. Marcus continued toward the police precinct. Then his phone rang through the dashboard. The caller ID displayed my own number. My phone was in my hand. Marcus answered without speaking. A man's voice came through the speakers. "Eleanor," he said. "You have something that belongs to me." I recognized Nolan Price from a promotional video on his company's website. His voice had the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to entering rooms where other people apologized for taking up space. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "You know exactly what I mean. The gray folder. Bring it to the archive. And this ends." "What ends?" A quiet laugh. "The misunderstanding." Marcus signaled and changed lanes, moving faster. Nolan said, "Your driver should take the next exit." Both of us looked toward the rear window. The silver station wagon was behind us. Marcus accelerated. The station wagon followed. What happened over the next 6 minutes never felt like a chase in the way movies teach you to imagine one. There was no music, no clean sequence of daring turns. There was rain, traffic, red lights, and the sickening awareness that every ordinary driver around us had no idea why Marcus was moving through lanes with such urgency. Nolan remained on the phone. "You cannot outrun this," he said. Marcus took an exit toward the industrial district. "Wrong direction," I whispered. "I know." He was not trying to reach the precinct. He was trying to determine whether the station wagon was following the car or tracking my phone. He turned into a gas station, passed through without stopping, and returned to the arterial road in the opposite direction. The station wagon overshot the entrance, braked, and made an illegal U-turn. "They are following us," Marcus said. Nolan heard him. "Smart man." Then the call ended. Marcus drove to a fire station instead of the police precinct. Its bay doors were open, lights bright against the rain. The station wagon continued past. Firefighters surrounded us within seconds. I called Ortiz again. This time she answered. She ordered us to remain inside the station. 20 minutes later, officers located the station wagon abandoned under an overpass. The plates had been stolen. Inside they found a prepaid phone, bolt cutters, plastic restraints, and a photograph of me leaving the bank. The gray folder was no longer merely evidence of fraud. It was motive. Ortiz obtained the warrant before midnight. Police entered the archive with the fire marshal and found no fire damage. The alarm had been triggered manually. Sylvia was gone. Nolan's voice call had been routed through my number using spoofing software, but the prepaid phone recovered from the station wagon contained a partial message history. One message referred to C14. Another said, "If she comes in, use the lower door." Detectives searched sublevel C. Cage 14 was empty except for a steel desk, a shredder, and a locked cabinet. The cabinet contained original settlement receipts from 23 cases, none of which should have been there. It also contained duplicate identification documents, beneficiary change forms, and handwritten notes estimating which claimants were unlikely to challenge missing funds. Beside Martha Keene's name, someone had written, elderly, no local family, memory concerns. Beside another name, undocumented son, will avoid police. Beside a third, deceased. The theft had not been random. It had been built around loneliness. Nolan and Sylvia selected people they believed the world would not listen to. But the most important discovery was not in the cabinet. It was inside the shredder. A technician reconstructed several strips of paper and found the name Calvin Brooks, the attorney I had called. Bank records later showed that Calvin had received consulting payments from Price Legal Recovery. He had not called me back because, within minutes of our conversation, he had warned Nolan that I was asking questions. That made Calvin the second suspect, and for several hours police believed he might have been the man in the silver station wagon. He was not. Calvin had helped conceal the fraud, but he had never visited my house. The man who had ridden with Marcus was a former private investigator named Dean Voss, employed off the books by Nolan. Voss had entered my home through the back door after copying the key from my handbag at a crowded coffee shop. He had searched the study, found nothing, and left when a neighbor turned on a porch light. Police arrested him the next morning at a motel near the airport. He gave them Sylvia's location. She was found in a rental cabin 60 miles east of Seattle with cash, 2 passports, and a laptop containing the full accounting ledger. Nolan remained missing. For 3 days, every siren outside the hotel made me stand. Every knock made Marcus move between me and the door. Ortiz warned us that Nolan was armed and desperate. She also believed he would try to recover the gray folder before leaving the country because it contained handwritten notes connecting him directly to the altered files. What she did not know was that the folder in the safe deposit box was a copy. The original was still hidden inside the archive. I had placed it behind the emergency procedures manual in the secure records room. Assuming no one would look for evidence inside a binder devoted to earthquakes and chemical spills. Nolan knew me well enough to guess I would keep the strongest evidence close. On the 4th night, the archive's backup generator activated despite a citywide power supply that was functioning normally. Ortiz called me at 11:42. "We have movement inside the building," she said. "Stay where you are." Marcus and I watched live security footage from her tablet in the hotel room. A figure in a maintenance uniform entered the freight elevator. The camera angle showed only the brim of a cap. The elevator stopped on the restricted floor. The figure stepped out. Nolan Price looked directly into the camera and smiled. Then every feed went black. Police units were 8 minutes away. Ortiz was 4. Nolan needed less than 2. He reached the secure records room, opened the emergency binder, and found the gray folder. But I had added one more page. It was a handwritten note addressed to him. "You chose people because you believed no one would notice them." Someone noticed. The folder contained no originals, only copies marked with ultraviolet tracking powder supplied by Ortiz. When Nolan touched them, the substance transferred to his hands and clothing. He ran for the freight elevator, found it disabled, and took the stairs towards sublevel C. That was where police trapped him behind the steel security cage. The emergency lights came on in narrow red strips along the floor. Nolan stood beyond the cage, one hand resting against the mesh. "Open the door," he said. I backed away. He lifted a ring of keys. "I can do it myself." I'm giving you the chance to make this simple. What do you want? Anything you copied? I copied nothing. His smile disappeared. You people always say that. You people. Thomas said the same thing, said he only wanted the truth. Truth is a word people use when they want to ruin someone and still feel righteous. A distant door slammed. Nolan looked toward the corridor. Marcus. I did not know how he had entered the building, only that he had. Nolan unlocked the outer latch. I pushed a rolling archive ladder across the cage entrance just as he opened it. The ladder struck his shoulder and knocked him backward. I ran. The basement corridors formed a maze of concrete turns and numbered doors. Red emergency lights made every hallway look identical. Behind me, Nolan shouted my name. Not angrily. Confidently. He believed he knew where I would go. I headed toward the loading ramp. A figure appeared at the far end. Marcus. This way. He called. We reached the stairwell and shoved through the fire door. An alarm began to scream. Nolan did not follow. That frightened me more than if he had. Marcus drove me directly to Detective Alvarez. By 2 a.m., officers were searching the repository. Nolan had vanished through a maintenance exit. His station wagon was gone. The company attorney arrived before dawn. He denied knowledge of the altered files, the override keys, and Nolan's connection to Price, Kessler, and Dean. Detective Alvarez was unimpressed. Someone hired a former evidence tamperer to guard evidence, she said. That is either criminal or breathtakingly stupid. We'll determine which. My phone photographs gave her enough to request financial subpoenas, but not enough for an arrest warrant on the fraud. The stalking case was stronger. Camera sabotage. Unlawful entry. Threatening conduct. Still, Nolan was missing. For the next 5 days, I stayed with Claire in Denver. I barely slept. Every passing car became the station wagon. Every unfamiliar number made my stomach tighten. I checked the locks in Claire's house so often that my grandson asked whether I was searching for something. I was. Proof that walls could keep a person safe. Marcus called once a day. On the 5th day, he said, Price used the app again. I sat upright. What? He requested a ride under a different account. Same phone behavior. Same pickup near the old industrial district. You accepted? Yes. Marcus? No. I cancelled before reaching him. But I saw where he was. Call Alvarez. I did. The police searched the address and abandoned print shop. Nolan was gone. But they found something in an upstairs office. Photographs of my house. Printouts of my work schedule. A map of the archive basement. And a handwritten list titled Options. Beneath my name were 3 phrases. Home search. Pressure. Accident. Detective Alvarez called me personally. Do not return to Seattle yet. But I already knew I had to. The investigation had become larger than me. The payment processor connected to 18 altered settlements. The losses exceeded $900,000. Several victims had died without knowing money had been taken from them. Nolan had not created the system alone. Someone inside the repository approved the replacement scans. Someone with administrative authority. Sylvia Grant had signed 6 of them. When questioned, she claimed her credentials had been stolen. Detective Alvarez did not believe her. Neither did I. I flew back on Monday. Marcus picked me up at the airport. You shouldn't have come, he said. I'm tired of other people deciding where I'm allowed to live. He nodded as if he understood exactly. That night, after meeting with Detective Alvarez, Marcus drove me toward a secure hotel downtown. Rain blurred the city into streaks of white and red. At 12:17, he passed the Lakeview exit. Marcus, I said. You missed it. His face changed. He had just received a call through his dashboard. A fellow driver had seen Nolan's station wagon parked near my house. Marcus did not tell me immediately. He called Alvarez first. Then he said the words I would remember for the rest of my life. There's a man inside your house. Police arrived 6 minutes later. They found the back door forced open. The kitchen drawers had been emptied. Thomas's office had been torn apart. Floorboards near his desk were pried loose. Nolan was still inside. He fled through the basement window and ran into the alley, where 2 officers were waiting. In his coat pocket, they found a loaded revolver, plastic restraints, and a small bottle of sedative. In his car, they found a shovel. Nolan asked for a lawyer and said nothing. Sylvia said too much. At first, she denied everything. Then investigators showed her the transaction timestamps, the altered scans, and security footage recovered from an off-site backup she had not known existed. She changed her story. Nolan had approached her 3 years earlier. The scheme began with dormant settlements cases where clients had moved, died, or stopped responding. Small amounts were redirected through North Coast processing, then divided among shell accounts. Sylvia approved replacement scans. Nolan removed or destroyed originals. A former paralegal at Price, Kessler and Dean identified vulnerable cases. No single theft looked large. Together, they formed a machine. And Eleanor? Detective Alvarez asked during Sylvia's recorded interview. Sylvia looked down. She noticed. What did you tell Nolan? That she was reviewing the files. Did you give him her schedule? I may have mentioned when she worked. Her home address? No. Detective Alvarez slid a printed employee emergency contact form across the table. Sylvia's login credentials had accessed it. Her face collapsed. I didn't think he would hurt her. That sentence appears in nearly every preventable tragedy. I didn't think. I didn't know. I didn't mean. Nolan's motive was not only financial. When he discovered I was Thomas Hayes's widow, his interest sharpened into obsession. In his mind, Thomas had destroyed his life. The fraud case had been a way to recover what he believed the world owed him. My audit threatened his money. My name threatened his pride. The gray folder he believed I had taken did not exist. But he had convinced himself it did. He thought Thomas had taught me to collect evidence, to hide copies, to wait for the right moment. In a strange way, he was correct about one thing. Thomas had taught me to notice what institutions prefer to ignore. He just had not known I would need that lesson to survive. The trial began 11 months later. By then, federal investigators had identified 29 altered settlements and more than $1.4 million in diverted funds. I testified on the 4th day. The prosecutor asked me to describe the first discrepancy. $287, I said. The defense attorney smiled as if the amount proved the case was trivial. You launched this entire chain of events over $287? No, I said. Mr. Price and Miss Grant launched it when they decided an elderly woman would not notice $287 missing from her settlement. The courtroom went quiet. Marcus testified after me. The defense portrayed him as intrusive. A driver who recorded passengers and inserted himself into a situation he did not understand. Mr. Reed, the attorney said, you are not a police officer. No. You are not an investigator. No. You had no formal training in surveillance. No. Then what qualified you to decide my client was dangerous? Marcus looked toward Nolan. He kept describing a woman's life as if it were a building schedule. The attorney paused. Marcus continued. He knew when she left work. When she arrived home. Which gate did not latch. Which nights the house was empty. Innocent people don't memorize a stranger that way. The recordings were played. Nolan's voice filled the courtroom. She's careful, but grief makes people slow. Then another clip. If she brought anything home, I'll find it. Then the final recording. Tuesday is clean. No family. No witnesses. The jury stopped looking at Marcus. They looked at Nolan. That was when the case changed from fraud to intent. The trial began 8 months later in a federal courtroom where every sound seemed sharpened by wood and stone. Nolan entered wearing a dark suit instead of jail clothing. He had lost weight, but not the habit of looking at people as though he were measuring what they might cost him. His attorneys argued that Sylvia had designed the scheme and used his company without his knowledge. They described him as careless, not criminal, arrogant, not violent. Dean Voss, they said, had acted independently. The prepaid phones could not be tied directly to Nolan. The voice on Marcus's dashboard recording was distorted. The tracking powder proved only that Nolan had touched a folder inside a building his company was authorized to enter. For 2 days, the argument almost sounded reasonable. That is the frightening thing about a practiced lie. It does not need to replace every fact. It only needs to give each fact a harmless explanation. Sylvia testified on the 3rd day. She wore a navy dress and no jewelry. Her plea agreement required truthful cooperation, though the defense reminded the jury repeatedly that truthful cooperation was difficult to measure when a reduced sentence was waiting at the end of it. She described meeting Nolan at a records industry conference 9 years earlier. He had begun with a proposal that sounded legal. Identify unclaimed settlement balances, and help attorneys return money to former clients. Then he showed her how many clients had died, moved, changed names, or lacked the resources to challenge incomplete payments. He said the funds would otherwise sit untouched. He called the first theft an administrative correction. They altered one receipt for $93. No one noticed. Then another for $200. Then $1,200. They created shell consulting invoices, redirected checks, and replaced originals with certified copies. Calvin Brooks helped them understand which law firms kept poor accounting records. Dean Voss located claimants and determined who was vulnerable. "Why did you continue?" the prosecutor asked. Sylvia looked toward the jury. "Because after the first few times, stopping would have required admitting what I had already done." "Why target Eleanor Hayes?" Her eyes moved to me. "Because she would not let the first discrepancy go." The answer carried no anger, only exhaustion. My own testimony lasted nearly 4 hours. The prosecutor led me through scanner identifiers, access logs, certification stamps, and the gray folder. The defense attorney tried to turn precision into obsession. He asked whether grief had affected my sleep, whether I had become socially isolated after Thomas died, whether I sometimes imagined hearing him in the house. "Yes," I said. The attorney paused, perhaps expecting denial. "I imagined his footsteps twice. I spoke to his photograph more than once. I forgot groceries in the car and left a kettle boiling. None of those things changed the scanner's serial number." A juror lowered her eyes to hide a smile. The attorney changed direction. He suggested Marcus and I had reinforced each other's fears until coincidence became conspiracy. "Mr. Reed saw a car," he said. "You saw an open drawer. Together you created a story." "No," I said. "Together, we compared details." "Is there a difference?" "A story asks you to believe the ending. Evidence allows you to test it." The courtroom became very quiet. Marcus testified the next morning. He wore the only suit he owned, purchased for his mother's funeral. He described the passenger, the repeated address, the reflected text, and the silver station wagon. The defense pressed him about Naomi. They argued that his failure to protect his sister had made him desperate to rescue someone else. Marcus did not resist the suggestion. "Maybe it did," he said. "But wanting to protect someone does not put restraints and bolt cutters in another man's car." Then the prosecutor played the dashboard recording. Nolan's voice filled the courtroom. "Your driver should take the next exit." For the first time since the trial began, Nolan stopped taking notes. The final witness was Martha Keene. She was 86 by then and walked with a cane. The defense had expected confusion. Instead, she carried every date in her memory with the force of a person who had spent years being told that numbers were too complicated for her. She described the apartment, her grandson's injury, and the settlement check. She said she had questioned the amount, but her lawyer told her medical liens had increased. She had accepted it because she was tired and because authority had always arrived in suits. The prosecutor asked what the missing money would have meant. Martha looked at the jury. "The amount taken from me was not enough to make those people rich. That is what they want you to think. But it was enough to pay for the inhaler I divided into smaller doses. Enough to replace the heater I kept repairing with tape. They stole small amounts because they believed small suffering would stay quiet." In the gallery behind her sat 11 other claimants or their families. Some had traveled across the country. 2 required interpreters. One woman held a photograph of her father, who had died before learning that his settlement had been altered. The fraud total eventually exceeded $1.8 million, but the prosecutor did not end with that number. She ended with the handwritten notes from cage 14. Elderly. No local family. Will avoid police. Deceased. These were not accounting categories. She told the jury. They were predictions about who mattered. The defendants believed invisibility was a resource they could exploit. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On the second afternoon, Ortiz sat beside me on a bench outside the courtroom. Marcus paced near a window, stopping each time the elevator doors opened. I asked Ortiz whether she thought the jury would convict. She said, "Juries are people. People can understand the same evidence and still fear different mistakes." "What mistake do you fear?" "Letting a dangerous person go." "And the defense?" "Punishing someone without certainty." "Which fear wins?" She looked toward the closed courtroom doors. "The one the evidence can live with." At 4:37, the clerk called us back inside. The jury foreperson stood. Nolan finally turned to look at me. There was no apology in his expression, and no rage. Only disbelief that attention, of all things, had defeated him. Then the verdicts were read. Nolan Price was convicted of conspiracy, wire fraud, evidence tampering, stalking, attempted burglary, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Sylvia Grant pleaded guilty before the verdict. The former paralegal cooperated and received a reduced sentence. The court ordered restitution, though everyone understood much of the money would never be recovered. Martha Keene, the woman whose missing $287 began everything, had died 2 years earlier. Her daughter attended the sentencing. Afterward, she found me in the hallway. My mother counted every dollar, she said. They probably thought she was confused. I did not know what to say. She took my hand. Thank you for believing the number mattered. That sentence stayed with me longer than the verdict. Justice is often described as a door closing. It did not feel that way. It felt like turning on lights in a building where people had learned to work in darkness. Northwest Civil Records Repository reopened under court supervision. New administrators were appointed. Every master override required 2-person authorization. Cameras were placed in every secure corridor. Historical settlements were re-audited. I returned to work. Not immediately. For several weeks, I could not step into an underground parking garage without feeling the red emergency lights beneath my feet. I could not hear keys jingle without remembering Nolan outside the cage. Fear survives evidence. It does not care that the threat is in custody. It memorizes sensations, not court records. Marcus still drove nights. At first, I sat in the back seat. Then one evening, he opened the front passenger door. "Better view," he said. I sat beside him. We talked more after that. He told me about his son, Caleb. About the night of the shooting. About the years of silence. "You warned me because of him," I said. "I warned you because I should have warned someone then. That isn't the same thing." To me it is. The trial received enough local coverage that Caleb saw an interview with Detective Alvarez. A reporter called Marcus, the driver who listened. 3 days later, Caleb phoned. Marcus answered while we were parked near the waterfront. He said only, "Hello." Then his face changed. He stepped out of the car and stood in the rain for 20 minutes. Phone pressed against his ear. When he returned, he was crying. "He wants to meet," he said. I handed him the tea I had brought. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. A year after Nolan's arrest, I sold the gray house on Lakeview. Not because he had won. Because Thomas was no longer inside it. That truth had taken me a long time to accept. Memory is not stored in walls. It travels with us in habits, phrases, recipes. The way we fold towels. The way we still reach across a bed in the dark. I moved into a smaller apartment near Green Lake. 3rd floor. Bright windows. Secure entrance. No side gate. Claire complained that Seattle was still too far from Denver. I told her distance was now measured in direct flights and answered calls, not miles. Marcus and Caleb began having dinner together on Sundays. At first the meals lasted 30 minutes. Then an hour. Then Caleb brought his girlfriend. Then Marcus's mother came on a day when her memory was clear enough to recognize everyone. I joined them sometimes. We were not a traditional family. We were people who had stopped pretending we did not need one another. At work, I trained new records specialists. On their first night, I showed them how to verify chain of custody, how to compare original documents against scans, how to identify numbers that had been altered by a fraction. Then I told them something that was not in the manual. Small discrepancies are where large crimes hide. One trainee asked, "How do you know when something is really wrong?" I thought of the station wagon, the open gate, the paper clip on my desk, the camera wire. Marcus's hands locked on the steering wheel as he passed my exit. "You rarely know," I said. "You notice. Then you check. And if someone tells you not to look too closely, you look closer." People later called Marcus a hero. He disliked the word. He said heroes know what they are doing. He had been afraid the entire time. That, I think, is why his choice mattered. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that another person's life is more important than your comfort. I still bring tea when Marcus drives me home. He still waits until I enter the building before pulling away. Some habits remain because they are useful. Others remain because they remind us of the night everything could have ended and did not. I used to believe my life was saved because a driver missed an exit. That is not quite true. Marcus did not miss it. He chose not to take it. He chose to believe the details other people would have dismissed. A drunk passenger repeating an address. A parked car appearing too often. A woman explaining away an open gate because fear was more exhausting than denial. And I survived because, before any of that, two lonely people had treated each other as human beings. A cup of tea, a quiet ride, a question asked twice. That was how the connection began. Connection became attention. Attention became evidence. Evidence became action. And action changed the ending. So when people ask what lesson I carried away from that winter, I do not tell them to distrust every stranger or fear every dark car. I tell them this: pay attention when someone's story does not fit. Believe patterns before they become proof. And never assume a small kindness is small merely because no one applauds it. You may never know which ordinary moment becomes the reason another person reaches home alive. That night in Seattle, rain covered the windshield, and my house waited in the dark. A man with a weapon stood inside. A driver looked at the exit, remembered every warning he had once ignored, and kept going. Because he did. I am still here to tell you what happened.